Hey everyone, today we're going to be replacing a 1992 Chevy Camaro fuel pump. So the first thing you're going to want to do, which I don't show in the video, is to get it jacked up and get the tires removed. The next step is we're going to take the trim around the fuel cap and remove the door. There's 3 bolts that hold the door on. There's 3 that hold the trim in as well. One thing about this that you got to be careful is when you loosen the bolts for the door, not to let the door scratch the car, because if you're not careful, it'll put a scratch on your car. So I just kind of hold it in here and take the 3 bolts out for the trim so that it doesn't scratch up your car. So once you get that pulled out, that's kind of the step number 2. Step 3 is going to be to remove the heat shield from right above the muffler. It's a little bit difficult to get to some of these screws with the muffler in. So in hindsight, I probably should have taken the muffler off first, but this is the video. It is what it is. And so this is just going to show you where all those bolts are. Once you kind of crawl up in there, it takes a little bit of reaching around, but it's not too bad. But that's how I did it. I took the heat shield off first, and you can see where all we had to remove those bolts at here. As you can see, this one was particularly difficult to get to. I think, yeah, there, I just dropped the socket. So I wanted to make sure we got all this in the video. It's real important here. So anyway, we get this taken out. And then the next step that we are going through is with the suspension track bar and brace. It's handy to have air tools. I use a few air tools in this job, and this was one step that I used the air tools with. Makes pretty quick work of taking those bolts out. So once you got these bolts out, now we're moving the brace here and the track bar with like I said, with the air tools, which made things go a lot faster on the removal. Okay, now we're removing the last bolt on the heat shield so that we can slide it out. That was a lot easier to get to with the track bar gone. And then here's the 2 right underneath the trunk well. So we slide the heat shield out. And we got that done. So now we are removing the sway bar links. Now hopefully yours, when you're taking yours out, they won't break on you like mine did. As you can see here, they broke on me, so I kind of had to hack and cut them the rest of the way out. So it was time to replace those anyway. We're also replacing the sway bar link brackets. Another thing we don't show in the video, now that you can see the shocks, you need to remove the rear bolt or the lower bolt on the shocks. So while we're watching cut the rest of these out, the next part is to take out the exhaust. Now, I don't show that in the video. We actually deleted the video accidentally. All you need to do is remove the 2 bolts from the end of the catalytic converter and remove the brackets in the rear of the car. and the muffler will drop down and you can slide it out on the right hand side. As you can see here, where you need to remove the fuel lines, disconnect all those fuel lines, and then you also need to unplug the fuel pump from its harness right there. Once that's done, now we're taking the tank straps off. These aren't too bad. You can, once you've got all the muffler out, you can reach up in there and unhook those pretty easily. At this point, you're probably wondering, is there any gas in the tank? Because this is really heavy. And it turns out we had about 5 gallons in the tank when we pulled it out, which, you know, would have been easier if it would have been empty, but that took out a lot of the fun of trying to drag out this heavy tank. So now the next thing, you want to remove that cam nut. You want to be careful. Obviously I'm using steel tools here. That potentially could have sparked and caught a fire and been a bad thing, but it didn't this time. So you probably want to be extra careful when you're doing that. So as you can see, you kind of just be real gentle when you're taking this out, removing those steel lines out of the inside of the tank. And here's kind of the real problem I'm showing. As you see, as I'm squeezing that hose, you can see it's all deteriorated. You can even see the hole kind of in the top. So really, I don't think my fuel pump was bad, but I needed to replace that hose, so I went ahead and just bought the fuel pump anyway. So as you can see, right here, we're taking the old fuel pump off. We removed the filter at the end and unhooked it. Now I'm taking off the deteriorated hose and putting the new hose on, which fits on just the same as it came out. I'm going to put the clamps on there. I'm going to get those clamps tight on the steel line, and then here's the new fuel pump. So we slide it in, and then now we're going to add the rubber sound insulator to the bottom so we can put the fuel pump back into, or put the strainer at the bottom. You'll see that here in a second. Once we get that second clamp on tight. Don't forget to plug in the fuel pump. That's important. You wouldn't want to get this all back together just to realize you didn't plug the fuel pump into the wire. Now we're putting the strainer back on, making sure everything's hooked up correctly. Oh, and here I'm going to show you where that hose is just all nasty, and that's probably where I was losing fuel pressure. Okay, so now we gently slide the fuel pump assembly back into the tank. It's kind of have to fit that in there at an angle. Then we're going to slide the cam nut back on. Make sure to get it positioned right. Put that O-ring back on there correctly so that it's nice and sealed. Alright, now here is the fun part. Once getting that tank back up in there and putting the straps back in is probably the hardest part that I encountered in this whole job. Getting the bolts to connect back and line up with the holes. But having help was good. Second person in this part is really helpful. After you get that done, you just reconnect the fuel lines, plug in the fuel filter. Now we're installing the heat shield back. It's a whole lot easier without the muffler being on this time. as you can see, there's the muffler. We reconnected the muffler to the catalytic converter, and it's just kind of hanging there. So I could put it back in place once I got the heat shield screwed in. There's a couple of bolts that are easier to do when the muffler's down. So I went ahead and did that. Now we'll get the muffler hooked back into its bracket in the back. And then reconnect those final bolts on the heat shield. Okay, now once you've got all your muffler and heat shield and all that put back in place, it's time to lower up or raise the rear end from when we lowered it down after we disconnected the shocks and everything. And so now I'm just holding those springs in place as we slowly raise up the rear end so that we can hook the shocks back up. So here we're connecting the shocks, or reconnecting the lower shocks. I guess I guess I didn't get that on video, disconnecting of the lower shocks, but once you have the rear end jacked up, you disconnect the lower shocks and then lower the rear end, which is why it's in this state right now, so you can get the fuel pump or the fuel tank out. So now we're tightening the lower shocks, getting those tightened back up. Okay, so now we've put the track bar brace back in. I went ahead and sanded it down and painted it since it was kind of starting to get pretty dirty, and since this was the only time hopefully I'll ever have that out, I thought it would be good to just paint it up, keep the rust off of it. And now we're going to install the track bar. Just want to make sure we get it hooked all back up, and we're almost done. The next thing we're going to do is install I bought new sway bar links, and so got those installed, or I'm going to install those next once we get the bolts on the sway bar tightened up, or I mean on the track bar tightened up. The lighting kind of got out of control here. Sorry about that. It's a little difficult to see, but we are definitely on the home stretch now. Finishing up the last little bit of tightening, make sure everything's good and torqued to spec. And now here we're, like I said, putting in the new sway bar links. And then once we get these put in, you'll want to put your tires back on and then lower your car. So once these get snugged tight to spec, we will give it a try, and I will cross my fingers and we will see if that fixed it. Thanks for watching, and if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to post them. Thanks.